Hey, what's going on? My name is Neil Parfit. Welcome to my channel. And as always, I'll be rambling incoherently about some form of studio technology. And today I want to talk about Analogue Patchbays. Very exciting. I can already tell how excited you are, but let's talk about this because this is an important part of recording studios and just wrangling all the equipment around you sometimes. If you're in a position where you have a lot of outboard equipment and you're not working just in a computer. So what is a patch bay anyway? If you're not an audio person, this is exactly like old telephone communications where an operator would patch a phone call by taking a cable and plugging it in and sending that signal somewhere else. That's all a patch bay is. And in an analog recording studio or a recording studio with a lot of analog electronics, you have a whole bunch of these patch points so you can access all this various equipment and then just patch it wherever it needs to go. Most common kind of connector you'll find in the audio world is a 1/4-inch connector. And these date back all the way almost 145 years ago. They're a phone connector. It's kind of amazing to think that not much has changed in the past 140 years with that connector type. We've scaled it down for consumers, which is an 1/8-inch connector, and you'll see those a lot on consumer grade headphones. You get it like the dollar store or anything really. They all use that 1/8-inch connector. And then some digital cameras and SLRs use an even smaller connector, but it's all based on these same phone connectors. In professional recording situations, more often than not, you'll find patch bays that have Bantam TT connectors. TT stands for tiny telephone. And they're used because they're smaller than 1/4-inch cables and they're bigger than the 1/8-inch size, which is a little too flimsy. They're kind of right in that middle sweet spot. And the great thing is, on a 1U piece of rack mount equipment, it's pretty high density. You can have up to 96 patch points on that panel. So usually it's arranged 48 on the top row, 48 on the bottom row. And you can have as many or as few of these kind of patch bays as you need, depending on how big your console is, how many tracks your audio recorder has, etc., etc., etc. So with these kind of patch bay scenarios, you'll find them pretty close at hand to where the job's being done. So in a recording studio, it's usually to the right or left of the mixer because the engineer needs to tweak some stuff, maybe go over to the patch bay, add in some additional equipment, and then go right back to work. It might be there, it might be on the wall close by, it might be on the producer's desk behind them, but it's all kind of in and around where you're working for the most part. Because this is a hard set wiring kind of scenario, a lot of care and time is put into planning how these patch bays will be deployed into this studio build. And it's usually based on the kind of recording console that's being used, the recording equipment, and all the outboard peripherals sort of surrounding that setup. There's a lot of soldering involved most of the time, a lot of cables, very expensive to deploy. And it's sort of set and forget until some critical piece of a studio changes. Like if you upgrade the console to a different analog mixer that has different needs, that whole thing might need to be rejigged. And that's additional expense. Tech has to come in, rewire it, possibly run new cable. So these do present some challenges here and there. But again, the pros sort of outweigh the cons because of the density. So if you have a very high input count mixer and it has a whole bunch of different auxiliaries and insert points and whatever, all that stuff can be on a bunch of these patch bays. All your equipment can show up and it's all just there ready to go. These kind of patch bays do offer some convenient features though. So if you do have a console set up a certain way, you might have things on the patch bay normaled. So if it's a 48 channel console, instead of having 48 cables to patch one part to another, if that part's always set the way you need it, electronically, it can just be connected behind the scenes. That's called normaling. You're setting up your normal working environment, and basically the signal coming from the top part of the patch bay is automatically routed to the jack below it behind the scenes. And if you want to take that signal and put it somewhere else instead, the moment you plug in a cable, it breaks the connection and you can patch it somewhere else. There's also a different method where you can half normal something where you can plug in a cable and the signal still completes that connection and you can put it somewhere else. But that doesn't really matter today. All I'm getting at is that these patch bays are high density and they make things easy with a few caveats of being really expensive to deploy and to change. So patching audio equipment is inherently easy. The only thing is, though, it's cumbersome for creativity versus if you're patching things for infrastructure. So a good example of that is, oh, I have some musicians on the floor. I need to connect some tie lines to a certain part of the console, or maybe I need to connect this headphone mix somewhere else, or patch into a click generator or something like that. Just kind of boring, mundane meat and potato kind of stuff. Whereas the creative aspect of patching is, maybe on this processing chain, I want to add a compressor, and then I want to add an EQ. Or maybe I want to hear it the other way around. And to do that, you have to manually go in and repatch all these things. So manual patching is just a part of record making if you're using analog equipment. It's been like this since the beginning. And I can't knock it because this is how all your hit records have been made and you've heard them this way, and it's fine. But a digital controlled analog patch bay will let you change gear order and connections instantly and give you more accurate A/Bing of different signals, because inherently our brains will usually pick the louder signal. If something's louder, has a little bit more bass, and you'll instantly be like, that one sounds cooler, obviously. And that's an old trick from like every stereo store. You just have this small clock radio, you hook up a subwoofer, and you're like, oh, there's more bass, I gotta buy that. Anyway, okay, so I'm gonna date myself now. Back when I was in music engineering college, which was 1998, we had MIDI lab stations. So basically it was an Apple G3. We had a bunch of synthesizers and some samplers. And we had this thing I had never seen before. It was a digitally controlled analog patch bay. And it was made by a Canadian company called Anatech. And the model was an SMP-16. And what it was a 2U box, had 16 analog inputs, 16 analog outputs, and sort of a menu-driven display where you could say, I want input 1 and 2 to go to 15 and 16, or 9 and 10, or whatever. And using this thing, we could route signals from the computer to the sampler, back into the computer, or we could redirect it going a different direction, going to something else, processing in a different way. We could define our favorite working scenarios, save a preset, and instantly recall it. So instead of having to manually patch in all these cables everywhere, all the cables end up at this one device, and you just change a preset and it just changes everything instantly. So that's the first time I ever saw something like this. So fast forward a few years to 2001, and I got my first job in post-production sound, and I was working at a studio facility that had 5 different rooms. And there was also a centralized machine room, and that's where I started working. And it was kind of amazing coming out of college, because here I am in this centralized command center, and then within another door, there's like glass and everything, and then just like 30 or 40 feet of supporting hardware equipment. And we're talking at that time, dating myself again, bunch of digital betas, Beta SP, there was some 3/4 inch video. I think there was 48 tracks of D88, and then there was these big AMS Neve mainframe computers running various consoles in the building. Right in the middle of all this, there's this computer monitor and a mouse at the table looking out into all this stuff, and there was this X and Y grid. And basically, you could route any bit of audio in the building to any other room in the building. This included analog audio, it included time code, it included digital video, it included AES digital, and I think it also included ISDN phone patch. So from this Windows 95 computer, you could sort of click a source and a destination and route the entire building from this centralized command area. So an engineer would call and be like, hey, we have some overspill of voice talent. We're going to use room number 3. Can you patch that into room number 5 and send them video? You could literally just click this and do it. And it was the coolest thing at the time. And not a lot of facilities had that. And I wish I knew what the model was. I honestly don't remember, but I remember them saying it cost 6 figures to install and configure this whole thing. Because you could instantly rejig the entire building on the fly and save presets and stuff, it saved a lot of man hours and wasted time physically patching things. So after I saw this, I thought this would be way more commonplace, but fast forward another 10 years, still not seeing this in use anywhere really. The next time I saw some sort of patch-based system that had a recall was when I was working at Air Studios on a film soundtrack. And you'd basically load up your room's template, and they had all these patch bays everywhere on the wall with a little LED light under each patch point. And you'd load up your preset, the LED would fly across to the point where you have to plug in a cable. You'd plug in a cable, it would know, and then another light would show up somewhere else, and that's where you'd patch the cable to. And you'd keep doing this over and over again until the room was patched. So that's the third time I ever saw some sort of patch recall system, and it was super cool. But from what I know, it was a one-off custom job. So that's not an end user type scenario for the common folk, you know? Like, I don't even want to know how much that cost. So fast forward almost 10 years again, and I'm working in my studio. It's around 2018, and I see an advertisement for this unit called The Patch. And it's made by a Canadian company in British Columbia called Flock Audio. And I was like, what is this thing? And basically, it's a 1U rack mount unit, 32 inputs, 32 outputs on DB25 connectors. And unlike these big XY grid patchers, you have an application where you define all the hardware you have based on wherever it's connected into the unit. And you can just drag and drop them like plugins, and it will instantly route them in any order you want. And then when you're happy with whatever these orders are, you can save it as a preset, and that's it. If I have, a certain synth sound design thing I'm doing, I could save that as a preset. If I'm using some analog outboard gear on my mastering chain on my summer, I can save that as a preset, and you can just reload things, change things around on the fly, and most importantly, you can instantly audition different orders of processing. So for me, that's adding a compressor after the EQ, or what does it sound like before? Or what if I malt out the compressor and have that come back in parallel? I could instantly try all these different things, and without having to manually patch a single cable. It's all just instant mouse clickery at my mix position because I'm already at the computer anyway, right? So all was well in the universe, using it for years. And like most Gear-o-holics, I superseded the capacity of this device, and now I had too much gear, and I was in this conundrum where I'm like, okay, well, I'll probably have to buy another one of these patch systems, or maybe another one after that, and have 3 of them or something. So while I was thinking of all this, they had an announcement that they were working on a new product called the Patch XT, and basically it's sort of like a super powered version of their existing thing. And instead of 32 in, 32 out, 96 in, 96 out, all in one box. And when I saw that, I was like, okay, based on all the gear I have and based on how I want to tap all this different gear in the room, that's the thing I want. And so it's taken a long time, but last week I actually received it. So I have the Patch XT in the studio. That was the last piece of the puzzle to build this room and connect everything the way I want. And I'm going to deploy it in the coming weeks. I can't do it yet because I'm just in the middle of an episode and I have to get a bunch of work off the plate before I pull stuff apart. But that's the next phase of this journey, integrating this Patch XT into the setup and just revitalizing how I use everything in here. So with the XT, I'm going to be able to access every piece of analog outboard in my room, including the modular, including my summer, and I can decide however I want to use this stuff. Before, it was sort of fixed architecture in a certain kind of way. All my analog was based on stereo sweetening. But now I could be working on the modular, building some sounds. I could take a reverb from my producer table, tie it into the auxiliaries over there. Or maybe I want to take my modular and put it into the summer and then do some stereo processing here or whatever. The point is, I can do whatever I want and it's instant because it's just drag and drop on an application. So I am going to keep the original patch, which is the 32 by 32, and I'm going to try and integrate this into my monitoring system. This part's more theoretical. I'm pretty sure it's going to work, but I will report back. The idea is I will use this to switch my main 12 channels of output DACs that go to the speakers, from that to my Dolby Atmos decoder. So if I want to watch authored content, I can just run a preset and it will take that decoder and push it right to the speakers. And that way, there's no additional conversion, there's no additional latency. What I see, what I hear is instantaneous, it's analog routing, and that's what I want. The other thing I'm going to do is, instead of running a cajillion DB25 snakes everywhere, I'm actually going to be running a fairly new format called AES 72-2019, which basically takes a DB25 8-channel balanced audio signal and converts that into 2 cat cables. So instead of spending a fortune on all this wiring to rig all this place up, I've bought 2 spools of 1,000-foot cat cable. That's what I'm going to run everywhere. And then me and my assistant will run that. And then when I'm done, I'll call my network computer guy. He'll crimp all the ends onto all these things and then patch in everything that way. And I've saved myself thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars of wiring. So I'm pretty excited about that. So this right here is the Flock Audio Patch XT. 96 inputs, 96 outputs, digitally controlled analog patch bay. It's a solid unit, weighs about 25 pounds, really well built. Not a lot of I/O on the front, just a few XLRs, stereo in, stereo out, just in case someone brings over something and you need to quickly patch something into it. But because this is such a high density unit, I just have a panel of 8 in, 8 out at my producer's desk that will eventually make its way back to this. So I have that available for clients to plug into. So this is the front, very simple, very clean. If we look at the back of the unit, there's 2 levels of DB25s, and I've already populated them with these AES 72-2019 spec DB25 to RJ45 connectors. Whew, that was a mouthful. But basically, each DB25 is broken out into 2 cat cables, basically. So each one of these connectors is 4 channels of balanced audio. And with these, and I'm still waiting for a few more, everything in the room will eventually end up here. And the idea is this will go right in the back at the top of my machine room closet, and audio from all the different elements of my room will terminate there. So everything from my front desk, my summer, my producer's table, modular inserts, and main mixer, all that stuff will end up there. And then I have digital control from my computer. So ever since I had the original patch system, I've been sitting at my computer in mix position, picking all my different processors, auditioning different orders, and, carrying out all that routing. And it's been great. But what if I'm at the modular? Then I have to run back to the computer, try something, go back, tweak it. You're doing a little bit of running back and forth. So we're kind of getting into that original mechanical patch bay scenario where you're just wasting time setting it up versus listening. So the next logical step would be to have control of this from a tablet or something like that. And that's exactly what Flock Audio has done. So they've taken their patch app and they've made a special version of it for the iPad called the Patch DX. So now I can be working anywhere in my room and I have control of my patch system at my fingertips. So if I'm patching and tweaking things, I could try different routing orders here. I could be like, oh, maybe I want to take my compressor and move it somewhere else. Or maybe I want to add EQ or add an insert reverb from the table and put it over there. I can now do this all here, which is super cool. And on top of that, it eliminates another huge step for me with Recall, especially with analog gear, is just documenting your settings. I have these notebooks of what's my compressor set to, what's my EQ set to. I have millions of iPhone photos, just documenting all this gear. With this app, now I can also take photos of all the gear that I'm using. And when I go to reload a preset, it shows me all the photos that I took with it. So now everything's just consolidated into one place. So it saves a lot of time, right? And initially I was like, okay, but now I'm stuck dealing with this iPad. So I've got to make sure that's backed up because that's the only point where all this stuff is saved. And that's not the case either. Now this will synchronize with the desktop app. So the data is in more than one place. So if I accidentally wipe the iPad or something like that, it's still over on my main system. So all this stuff is in multiple places, and that's my safety net for backups. And as I said before, this is the final piece of the puzzle for this studio. Been waiting a while. Took about a year to build this space and kind of waiting for this while that was all happening. Now it's here. Next week I'm going to wire it and I will report back on how this all goes. So thanks for listening. I know this was a bit of a mouthful today, but I'm really super stoked, as you can probably tell. And I'll talk to you all soon. Have a good one. See you later.